Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Furman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. Attachment style forms the foundation for how we understand trust, security, and build our self-concept and self-esteem, which then affects how we achieve goals, approach physical and mental wellness, and how we relate to friends, family, colleagues, and romantic partners. How may we heal negative attachment styles and embrace positive attachment styles? My guest this week on Vox Novus, Dr. Judy Ho, reveals how insecure attachment style, which affects up to 75% of the population, impacts our lives more than we realize, and how we can heal the wounds that prevent us from living our best lives at any age. Dr. Judy Ho is a triple board certified and licensed clinical and forensic neuropsychologist, a tenured associate professor at Pepperdine University, and author of the 2019 best-selling Stop Self-Sabotage. Her website is drjudyho.com, and she joins me this week to discuss her path and just published book, The New Rules of Attachment: How to Heal Your Relationships, Reparent Your Inner Child, and Secure Your Life. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus Dr. Judy Ho. Welcome, Dr. Judy.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Victor. Really glad to be here.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful for you to join us and share some information that'll be very valuable to our listeners. For our listeners meeting you for the first time, please share your path and how it led to your calling as a clinical psychologist.
Of course. So I actually had my first seeds planted for a career in the psychology field as a high school student. I was a participant in the Big Brother, Big Sister Club when I was a high school student. At the time, I thought this sounds like a great time, hang out with some cute kids. It's a great resume builder for college, but I did not know that it was going to have such a huge impact on me just as a person and also professionally. I was paired with a 10-year-old little girl. I was 15 at the time. And so what did I know, right? She's 10 years old. I'm 15. I had no psychological training whatsoever. We didn't even have a psychology elective class in my high school. But I just continued to show up every week, take her to ice cream, take her for a movie, go to the park, sit with her. And she had been in no less than 8 or 9 group homes at the time that she was 10. And pretty quickly, it became clear that I was really the most consistent person in her life. And that really had a positive impact on her own belief in herself, her ability to feel that she could be cared for and loved by somebody. And really all I was doing was just showing up and having conversation with her. So I think that was the first time that I really understood the impact one person can make on another person simply just by showing up, essentially just by being mindful. But at the time, of course, I didn't know what that term really meant. And so that really sparked my interest in psychology. And fortunately for me, I feel very blessed to have been in this career for a long time now.
Absolutely. You know, I have a sense from reading your books and talking with you now that you were actually a very good listener even before that experience and that you cared about people.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, for me, I think that the most important thing about my journey as a psychologist has always been to try to destigmatize mental illness for people. I have definitely noticed just even among my close friends and colleagues, but definitely with patients that I've worked with, that so much of it is that they're not able to admit to themselves that maybe they're struggling because they think that admitting that they have mental health concerns looks like a weakness, looks like a character weakness of some sort. And that has really motivated me to try to get really helpful information out there, but in a way that doesn't make people feel like they have to be ashamed at all. You know, I try to describe these terms as universally as possible because I think all of us struggle from time to time. And it's really just about when you need to do something about it because it's affecting your life to that level.
Now, most of us are familiar with the work of clinical psychologist, but your extended title is fascinating. Clinical and forensic neuropsychologist. When we hear the word forensic, many of us think of forensic investigations at a crime scene. Please unpack clinical and forensic neuropsychologists for us.
Sure. So, neuropsychologist is one of my subspecialties. This is a person who specializes in the relationships between the brain as well as your behavior. And so, oftentimes, we look at how the brain functions, how we learn, how we have memory, our attention span. And I do assessments to look at these factors. And so, a big part of my private practice is actually conducting neuropsychological evaluations where people may have concerns about the way that their brain is functioning. And I do assessments to help them understand that, whether it's because of potentially a traumatic brain injury that's affected their functioning, or maybe substance abuse, or maybe even just getting older, having dementia, or developmental conditions like autism and ADHD. That's a big part of my specialty. But as a result of me having this specialty in brain and behavior relationships, I've been sought after in civil and criminal cases to talk about how mental health impacts a person in those sectors. And so in the civil world, it's mostly people saying, I was injured from this particular situation or this event, and then I have to evaluate exactly how they were injured and what symptoms are showing up, as well as help prescribe a treatment plan. But in the criminal setting, oftentimes I'm asked to look at people who might be defending themselves in a criminal case and assessing whether or not these individuals have any mitigating factors. Are there any other reasons we should be considering that might explain their behavior? Are they able to recidivate? Are they able to become productive citizens of society at some point? And whether or not any of these factors should be taken into account during their sentencing as well as trial.
Not to spend too much time on that topic, but I'm curious, do you see a pattern in people who lead to criminal lives?
There are some patterns. It's never just one thing, but oftentimes you'll find that there are some biological indicators that perhaps their brain is slightly different. One thing that we often see is that their reward centers seem to be a bit hijacked. They seem like they're not able to experience reward and joy in the same way that people who do not commit crimes do. So they need more of a stimulation to start to feel good or to start to feel any emotion at all. But also there's a number of psychological factors as well, and environmental factors. So many individuals who have criminal histories did grow up in extremely violent, extremely abusive homes. And they may have grown up with parents or other adults who actually in different ways showed them that crime could be rewarded somehow. And that may have been a huge factor in their learning.
We'll be discussing your just published new book, The New Rules of Attachment, a little later in the interview, but please share with us the inspiration for your 2019 best-selling Stop Self-Sabotage, 6 Steps to Unlock Your True Motivation, Harness Your Willpower, and Get Out of Your Own Way.
Yeah, so I've really found that even in the most successful people, there was some element of self-sabotage that had occurred either in the past or maybe for them now. And for most people, self-sabotage doesn't occur in every single area of life. It only occurs maybe in 1 or 2 areas. And I really wanted to unpack why this was, because it wasn't just about people who are blowing up their lives in every single area. These are people who are relatively or very successful, but just in a couple of areas, they just keep getting in their own way. Why is that? So that was a big drive for me to put this book together, because oftentimes people will even use that term. They'll say, oh, well, I self-sabotaged X. And then they just kind of move on as if there's no solution. So that was really important for me to impart on people. There is a scientific way to work through this. There's a reason why this is happening. And here is how you can take action and put this back in your own hands.
What's the wiring behind self-sabotage? How does it occur?
Self-sabotage occurs because so many times our brains are just trying to achieve that delicate balance of attaining rewards and also avoiding threat. It's what we need to be able to survive and thrive. And when things are relatively balanced, everything is going well. But oftentimes we end up flipping the switch on the threat indicator. So we might sometimes misread a situation, fear the threat more so. And then when that threat scale is tipped, you start to think about the potential threat so much more that you end up pushing down the drive that should be at least equal in trying to attain rewards. And so when that happens, all kinds of things happen in our brain. We start to have this type of self-talk that in essence trying to protect us, but actually ends up holding us back from doing things that will really ultimately serve us.
Is there a self-worth component also?
Absolutely. Many people who struggle with self-sabotage, especially those who are chronic sufferers of self-sabotage, there's a self-worth component. There's a part of them that doesn't feel like they deserve good things. There's a part of them that questions whether they deserve good things. So then when good things start happening, they start doing things to essentially become self-defeating in many ways. They start to, if they're in a great relationship, they start to question that relationship. They start to do things to stir the pot, to create conflict when there doesn't need to be any. When they receive a promotion, when they're not certain that they deserved it, they will inherently do things like start procrastinating on bigger projects or become really dependent on other people's opinions of them to be able to move forward. And then in essence, that could create a self-defeating pattern where they actually end up doing less at their job, at their new position, and then end up getting in trouble with their boss because they're not performing the way that they were hoping they would. So a lot of these things can happen, and it's not always conscious. Oftentimes this is operating at a subconscious level, but that's why it's important to bring it out into the light and talk about what we can do about those thought patterns.
Is there a common form of self-sabotage that you can give us an example of, and how may it be stopped and avoided?
Procrastination is a big one. And I think that a lot of people think that they're procrastinating because that gives them the impetus, that gives them the drive, the motivation to do things last minute. That's where their best ideas come. But even if that was true on occasion, our brains have selective memory. Our brains oftentimes will believe or only selectively pay attention to certain situations that seem to prove our point. And then you forget all the times where, you didn't sleep and actually you didn't turn in your best work. And inevitably that ends up happening to almost everybody who procrastinates. At some point, you just simply run out of time to do your best work. And then you will suffer the consequences of that in a variety of areas. And so in terms of how to start eradicating that behavior, it's important to notice the thoughts that you have prior to procrastinating. And once you recognize what those thought patterns are, you have to start changing them and modifying them in a way that is more realistic to the situation. And one of the ways that I like to talk about thought modification is not so much just positive thinking and a positive mantra. That doesn't really work. That type of thinking doesn't work because sometimes there's a toxic positivity element to it. You say these positive mantras to yourself, but you don't really believe them. So that actually causes you even more of a dissonance, making it harder for you to achieve your goals. So I like to use a yes, but technique. Yes, recognizing something that's not going super well or is a problem that you're having. And then, but fill in the blank with something that you are in progress, that you're working on, or something that is going relatively well. So one example is, yes, I did procrastinate this last project and my supervisor seemed to be upset at me for it, but I have a new plan for how to tackle this next project, including a timeline that's outlined from 2 weeks ahead of when it's due. So once you start to practice this alternate way of thinking, you'll find that it's a lot easier for you to move forward and to eradicate previous patterns of self-sabotage.
What about self-sabotage in personal relationships?
Self-sabotage in personal relationships is one of the most common ways people self-sabotage. I think it can be very scary for people, especially those who generally like to be in control, to leave something up to another person whose thoughts you really can't control no matter what you do and how you try. So I think that oftentimes people will either write off a person too quickly, tell themselves that they don't really actually need the connection and distance themselves from a potentially good partner, or because of their own insecurities, end up being so reliant on that partner's reinforcements and essentially exhibiting clingy behavior that eventually the partner actually does get frustrated with that and ends the relationship. So in those ways, it is important to take a look at the underlying factors that are rooted in how you feel about yourself. Sometimes people are afraid to take chances on romantic relationships because they don't know if they can truly trust another person. And unless you take the time to work out that concern, you're always going to find yourself in the same exact pattern. Similarly, if the underlying driver is your lower self-esteem, you can be with the best partner possible, and you're still going to want to have them reinforce you every few hours so that you feel safe in the relationship? So the answer really comes down to working on whatever underlying drivers are there for your self-sabotage of personal relationships, and working on ways that you can start moving past some of those earlier wounds and start healing yourself instead of being dependent on something else or someone else to heal you.
Is self-sabotage something that starts from conditioning when we're children?
It can start from that time because there's an evolutionary basis to it. As we mentioned earlier, there's two drives that we're constantly managing at all times: attaining rewards and reducing threat. And if those things are out of balance in a chronic way, that's when people self-sabotage, when they think about the threats so much more. And that can start as early as your first few days of life, when you're observing the adults around you, how they respond to stressors, how they respond when you express a need. All of those things create these templates, these imprints on how we think we should approach life in the future. And so some of the roots of self-sabotage can absolutely go back to the early years of life.
How may parents recognize this and help their children?
Parents can recognize it by just being a little bit more self-aware. There's never going to be a perfect parent, right? And no one's going to be that all the time. But I think that sometimes your unhealed wounds end up being imprinted onto your children because of your own early negative experiences, or perhaps patterns of coping that aren't the most healthy that you've learned from your own childhood. And so just by being a little bit more aware, being a little bit more mindful to your thought processes, to the way that you behave when you're under stress, and also how you might make things learning moments for your children. You're never going to do things perfectly, but when you do something like, accidentally emotionally fly off the handle a bit when your child is crying and frustrated, and you're also frustrated on the same day, it's important to debrief that with your children in a developmentally appropriate way. For younger children, you can say, hey, I'm so sorry that mom, got a little bit upset at you earlier. I'm dealing with some things at work, but I'm trying really hard to not take it out on you. And next time I do this, please, tell me, or here's what I'm working on to make sure I don't do this the next time, right? It's important to be able to talk about this so that your children don't feel like they can't come to you when they need something. Or worse yet, even fear you when you look stressed, like they can't even approach you, right? So these kinds of conversations are important because they're life lessons for your children. And also they offer an explanation for what's going on, because the first thing that children tend to think is that they caused something, that it's their fault. And that's just because of the way that children think. They're a little bit more concrete. So they don't think, well, mom must be having a hard day. They're thinking, well, I must have done something to make her so mad. And so it's important for them to be relieved of feeling like they have to take care of your feelings, and also to let them know it's not their fault and that you're working on it. That's positive modeling for your children.
What do you want the readers to take away from Stop Self-Sabotage?
I want readers to take away that at any age, you can stop these patterns, no matter if they've affected you for a year, 10 years, or 30 years. And the thing that is most important to remember is that as long as you're able to do a little bit a day, you're not going to change all these patterns all at once over a weekend. But if you're able to dedicate yourself to an exercise or two every single day, you're going to start to see some really radical shifts very quickly within a few weeks. And that is going to be the fuel that keeps you going. And when you start to see all the positive outcomes in your life, you're going to say, you know what, this was worth the time and this was worth the effort. It's all about taking something out of automatic drive, learning that manual shift for a little bit. It will feel difficult, but then eventually this new idea, these new thoughts are going to become your new normal, and they're going to be a lot easier to implement.
Congratulations on your brand new book, The New Rules of Attachment: How to Heal Your Relationships, Reparent Your Inner Child, and Secure Your Life Vision. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
There's an old joke about Hoover introducing the Zen vacuum cleaner. It comes without attachments. What inspired this new book?
I felt like once I was seeing how much stop self-sabotage was positively impacting people, I oftentimes got a question of, what's the next level? Like, what's the deeper level of work? And I really saw that attachments was where everything came down to. These early experiences in life, our very first bonds with our primary caregivers in our lives, it imparts so many life lessons and gives us a template for how to move forward in different areas of life, but most of all, gives us the constructs of how we think about ourselves. And so our own self-knowledge, our belief in our self-worth, who we think we are, and ultimately whether or not we deserve good things, that really is the main ingredient in almost all things in life where you're trying to think about actualizing, moving towards a goal, what you want to involve your life with, what your top values are. It all goes back to your sense of self, and your sense of self is developed from attachment.
My guest is Dr. Judy Ho. We're talking about her new book, The New Rules of Attachment, How to Heal Your Relationships, Reparent Your Inner Child, and Secure Your Life Vision. Dr. Judy, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you.
Oh, thank you so much. My books can be purchased wherever books are sold. Most people like to purchase it through Amazon or Barnes & Noble, also through my publisher's website, Hachette. You can also find out more about me and get free resources at my website, drjudyho.com, or follow me on social media at Dr. Judy Ho.
And we'll be back with more of Dr. Judy after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going Om. My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
If I could be you,
and you could be me for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out, and for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
This is the story of a very special woman. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician or an entrepreneur. Her knowledge was limitless and still is. She could also make monsters disappear, especially those that lurked in the shadows under the bed. Once, this woman put back together a teenage girl's broken heart, which had been shattered in 1,000 pieces, just by giving her a bear hug. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hey, son, how are you feeling?
I'm fine, Pops.
What's on your mind?
I can't explain it.
When your kid can't find the language, find the lyrics. Start a conversation at sounditouttogether.org. Brought to you by Ad Council and Pivotal Ventures.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dr. Judy Ho. We're talking about her new book, The New Rules of Attachment, How to Heal Your Relationships, Reparent Your Inner Child, and Secure Your Life Vision. Dr. Judy, please tell us about the foundation of attachment theory.
So attachment goes back to those earliest bonds that you had with your primary caregivers. And your primary caregivers are typically the people who provided for your needs as a little child on a regular and ongoing basis. Without these bonds, we simply could not survive. If you think back to why mammalian babies are so cute, they're cute because they have to be. Most mammalian babies cannot survive on their own without an adult in the same species. And so essentially your baby cuteness is there to try to get people to take care of you so that you can survive into the next phase of your life. At this time, this is a time of rapid knowledge acquisition. And so you're soaking up everything about the world around you and you're expressing your needs, right? As babies, we oftentimes express our needs through crying, pointing, gesturing, whatever we can before language is formed. And we start paying attention to how the people in our lives take care of us or don't take care of us when we express these needs. And all of this goes into the makings of what you believe about yourself, how you believe the world works, and what you think is going to happen when you interact with others. And ultimately, whether or not you deserve good things in life, that's a huge part of your self-belief that is constructed from this early time.
What are the different attachment styles, and how do they manifest in personality and behavior?
There's three insecure attachment styles, and then there's one secure attachment style. So 4 attachment styles total. Someone with secure attachment likely had parents who were relatively attentive most of the time and showed up in ways that you found to be helpful, especially during stressful times. If this occurred, you're more likely to have a relatively high self-esteem, to believe that you deserve good things, to be able to individually pursue goals while also staying connected with important people in your life, and to be able to be resilient in the face of stress. If you developed anxious attachment, this oftentimes meant that you had parents who perhaps were dealing with some of their own anxiety and stresses, and so were less inattentive. They were less attentive to you. These are parents who sometimes, because of some of their own struggles, made you sometimes feel responsible for their own emotions and their own problems and you trying to solve it for them. If this happened, you most likely developed anxious attachment, which means that you're more likely to need reassurance from your social environment to feel good about yourself. You tend to have a more positive view of other people than yourself. So this is something that makes anxiously attached people more prone to codependency and trying to rescue everybody around them as a way to get support from them or to feel cared for by them on the other side. And generally, people with anxious attachment need to feel like they have to touch base with the people around them all the time so they can still feel like they're there, that they're being cared for. If you have avoidant attachment, you likely were asked to grow up much quicker maybe than you should have. Maybe you were an identified parentified child is a term that we sometimes use, where you were given big responsibilities at a younger age. Perhaps you started to associate that people cared most about you when you were achieving or doing things that garnered accolades or positive attention. And so then you became more driven to focus on that rather than depending on the people in your life. As an adult, these individuals are the quintessential lone wolves. They're sometimes extreme perfectionists and extreme high achievers, and they tended to be less comfortable with emotional expression and deeper emotional connections with people. And the last kind of insecure attachment is disorganized attachment. So these are individuals who sometimes grew up in families where there was a lot of chaos, where the rules were different all the time. It was hard to get any kind of consistency. Perhaps they've even been exposed to trauma in their childhood. And for these individuals as adults, they're constantly in a fight or flight stage. It makes it a lot harder for them to achieve their higher level goals because they're constantly thinking about more just basic levels of survival. They tend to have more difficulties regulating their emotions and just feeling safe in a variety of usual daily environments. And so those are the 4 different types. And I think something that's really important to point out is that even if it's a type that you feel like you started out with, or maybe you're still exhibiting some traits from, the key is knowing that you can heal from your attachment at any age and stage in your life. And you can begin that work at any time, even if the adults in your life from your childhood are not available or want to do that work with you.
I read that insecure attachment styles account for 75% of the population. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So depending on the study, it's anywhere from 65 to 75% is the best estimate. And I would also say that for a lot of people, they think, well, this describes me some of the time, but not all of the time. And I would say that that's probably true of most people who express some form of insecure attachment. It's kind of like self-sabotage, where it's not every single area of your life where you see some of the negative outcomes of these insecure attachment types. For the most part, you might actually even be able to function rather well. But it's really during those really stressful times, or perhaps when you're triggered from something that reminds you of a negative experience in the past, or when you're in a new environment and you don't really know what to do and you can't get your bearings yet, that's when the shadows of your insecure attachment show up. Another thing to point out is that a lot of times people will find that they're kind of a combination of types. So they might say, well, at work, I'm more anxiously attached, but then in romantic relationships, I'm more avoidantly attached. Is that normal? And that is also a very normal way to express your attachment styles. You may not be just all one attachment style. You could be a combination, and they can show up at different times in your life.
In The New Rules of Attachment, you offer a wonderful quiz to help readers identify their personal attachment styles. What are some of the questions in the quiz, and how do they apply?
Yeah, so the quiz questions have to do with the different domains of your life in terms of showing up, in terms of your self-concept, how you believe about what you believe about yourself, how you relate to other people, what you believe are the rules of the world. And there's 37 questions total that cover about 7 or 8 different areas of your life, from family relationships to collegial relationships to friendships to romantic relationships to how you go about your physical and mental wellness, and also what you think about yourself. And so from this quiz, you're going to be able to understand which of the attachment styles speaks most about you in terms of how you think and how you behave. And then in my book, I have different sections that help you to do the work for different types of attachments.
And as we shared about self-sabotage, the roots of attachment styles are developed when we are children. How may parents help their children in developing secure attachment styles?
That's a great question. And I think for parents, knowing where some of your insecure attachment shows up is a really big step. And I think that sometimes parents will say, well, if I have insecure attachment, does that mean that that's going to happen to my child? And it's not. You can break that generational trauma, if you will. And a big part of doing that is just by acknowledging some of the traits of the insecure attachment that might be getting in the way of you living your own best life, and doing the work to try to move that forward for yourself. But also, as far as your child is concerned, even if your insecure attachment isn't healed while you're parenting, that's perfectly okay. The most important thing is just to remember that we're actually very, very simple. We just want people to show up for us. And that's really one of the key things that we need. And so you don't have to have all the answers. You just have to show up and be there and be willing to actively listen to your child's needs. And even if you don't have the answer, just be present for them emotionally and physically. I have oftentimes heard from parents, and this is true of myself with my own child, where I could think of all kinds of amazing things to do to, buy toys for my toddler, plan a great day at Disneyland. And all those things are nice, of course. But sometimes all my child needs is just for me to sit next to them and be with them. And even if you don't have all the answers, if you're willing to mindfully show up and show up intentionally for your child, then that is going to go a very long way.
Presence and listening.
Presence and listening. Those are really the most important ingredients of parenting for a secure child.
As you share, attachment styles affect all of our relationships, personal and professional. Please share with us some examples of these and the challenges they present.
So, insecure attachment can present itself in professional realms in a variety of different ways. People who have anxious attachment might be so concerned with their social situation at work, whether or not everybody likes them, needing to get a lot of reinforcement before you can move forward on a project, that they actually get in the way of them being able to achieve more at work and to do their best work. People with avoidant attachment, sometimes at work, they find it harder to work in teams. They want to be the lone wolf all the time, but that's not conducive to working in groups or working in a way that feels like a collaboration. They can become overly competitive and essentially minimize the need for social structure and social connections. And in that way, they can self-sabotage their best efforts as well. People who have disorganized attachment find it really difficult to trust people. And so if you're operating in that state of fight or flight all the time, it can make it really hard to actualize into some of the bigger and more important goals. It can be really hard for them to make consistent progress in their job. And oftentimes they may find themselves in a state of chaos and feel like they can't organize their thoughts to be able to move forward. In personal relationships, I think that some of the similar themes will emerge. So people who have disorganized attachment in personal relationships, they can at times pick fights with people just to see if they're still going to be there for them, just to see if they're going to still be there to care for them. And that obviously is going to create a lot of conflict in your personal relationships and make it harder for you to have long-term, stable relationships with people. When you have avoidant attachment, when you are under stress, you're more likely to withdraw from the world and not talk to people. Or when people have emotional needs, you're more likely to make an excuse and not be around them and not have to deal with it. And of course, that makes it harder for you to have deeper connections with people that are healing on both sides. People who have anxious attachment, oftentimes in their interpersonal relationships, they need so much more attention than the average person, so much more reinforcement to feel good, that it can sometimes frustrate the people that they're in relationship with because they don't understand why you're asking them for reinforcement or reassurance again, when clearly you're here, clearly you care about them, and that can cause conflict in its own way.
How do attachment styles affect our choice of romantic partners?
Attachment styles can affect your choice of romantic partners because you oftentimes will try to find partners that will help you to work out your previously negative experiences subconsciously or unconsciously. And so oftentimes a common mix that we see is people who have anxious attachment ending up with partners who have avoidant attachment. And that's because there may have been some people in their early life where they were not very reinforcing. They were not giving them too much emotional support. And that's what caused some of their anxious attachment to develop. And so then they look for people with avoidant attachment because it's kind of all they know. And then they go through that cycle again of trying to get this person's attention, trying to get reinforcement from them and reassurance. But the person with avoidant attachment, they feel suffocated sometimes when that happens. And so then they start backing away from you more. And that unfortunately creates this belief for the person with anxious attachment where they're confirming a pre-existing belief about themselves, which is, well, nobody cares about me. And unless I basically bend over backwards to meet their needs and essentially put their needs before mine, I'm not going to have a good partner. And so sometimes we end up replicating some of these negative patterns from our childhood because we're trying in essence to get over it, but then we're using the same formula, which is probably not going to work very well.
You had touched upon this before. What are some of the other attachment style triggers?
Attachment style triggers can be anything that really relates to a negative experience that was formative in your ideas about life, your ideas about yourself. So for people with insecure attachment, these kinds of triggers could be anything from somebody wanting to have a deeper relationship with you and expressing that, or somebody saying that they're busy and start to become more involved in their own work and not giving you the attention that you need. It can happen when you feel like there may be a potential for abandonment. It can happen in a lot of different areas. And sometimes you don't even realize that that's what's happening underneath. All you know is that you're starting to feel emotionally flooded or emotionally frustrated, or maybe even fearful or anxious. And sometimes we can't understand why until we look deeper at that situation and realize that perhaps it's a mirror, perhaps it's a reflection of something that had happened at an earlier time, but it's just with a different person, and that it's triggering some of those issues that you haven't resolved.
So a trigger takes place. How do we handle it?
When a trigger takes place, the most important thing to do is to note that it's a trigger, to understand that it's a trigger, but that the same thing doesn't have to happen just because a trigger happened. And so it's about intentionally making a different choice in terms of how you want to respond, intentionally trying to regroup your thinking to say, well, this is catastrophic thinking. So what's a healthier way? What's a more balanced way of thinking about this situation? It's about providing some of that care to yourself and not necessarily relying on an external factor or another person to do it. And this is why the work of reparenting is so important. Reparenting, put very simply, is just giving your metaphorical inner child what it needed back then, but maybe didn't get enough of. And the reason why reparenting works is, as your adult self, you are much more capable and have many more resources than your child self. And you are also the person who has your unique lived experience. No one knows you better than you. And as your adult self, you can start to create the template for a secure attachment just by simply showing up and saying, what is it that my inner child needs right now? What is my inner child scared of because of something that had happened in the past? And what's one small thing I can do to try to take care of that need or to soothe that inner child?
One small thing. The new rules of attachment, how to heal your relationships, reparent your inner child, and secure your life. My guest, Dr. Judy Ho, will be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human. And she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Hey, Dad. Your prescription will be ready in just a minute. Hey, Dad, your laundry will be ready in just a minute. Dad, your lunch will be ready in just a minute.
Hey, honey, why don't you take a minute?
When you help care for a loved one, you give them as much time as you can. But it's just as important to take time for yourself. AARP can help. Find free care guides to support you and your loved one at aarp.org/caregiving. That's aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Dr. Judy Ho. We're talking about her new book, The New Rules of Attachment: How to Heal Your Relationships, Reparent Your Inner Child, and Secure Your Life Vision. Dr. Judy, one of the things that I personally struggled with was people-pleasing and creating healthy boundaries that started with my childhood relationship with my father. I never felt that he loved me until I was 8 and he took ill. I became part of his caring team with my mom, and for the first time, I sensed that he loved me. And this wired in my young mind that if you care for others, you will be loved. And it took until my late 40s to turn this around and learn to create healthy boundaries and learn to say no when appropriate. What are some of the methods you offer readers for overcoming people-pleasing and creating healthy boundaries?
Well, first of all, Victor, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I think that that's so relatable. And establishing healthy boundaries can be so difficult, especially when you know that you are a people pleaser. There's two reasons for that. One is it's kind of egocentric. And what I mean by that is it's something that makes you feel good. It's something that you want to do, right? It feels great to be able to take care of somebody else and for them to express that gratitude. And you want to help other people. That's a genuine part of who you are. And so this behavior of like healthy boundaries can feel like it flies in the face of that. Well, I want to be helpful. So if I say no, does that mean that I'm not being helpful? And what's this person going to do? And so there's one aspect of that is truly driven by just your wanting to help and just because you're wanting to be a good person to others and serve others. But I think the other part that is difficult to eradicate is what you mentioned, which is that you start to cement this idea that if you care for someone, if you provide for them, then you're going to be cared for. So you're going to be able to get something for yourself, get something for your own self-concept to feel secure. And that's why it can be so hard, because these earlier patterns, even if they no longer apply to your life as an adult, they stick with us because they're during that critical learning period where you're picking all of this up and you're soaking it up and you think, well, of course, this is the way that the world works. It worked in this situation. Why wouldn't it work in every other situation? So the way to actually start to establish healthier boundaries is to actually define what that looks like for you. I think if you have been a people pleaser for a while, it's harder for you to define that. It's harder for you to actually say, hey, I actually took a look. I actually took a personal inventory at what my boundaries are and what feels okay to me and what doesn't. And it takes time to do that work. And most people who are people pleasing have not taken that attention to themselves to be able to do that. But I think it's maybe an easier formula just to talk about the different areas of boundaries that you might have. So could put very generally, most people, if they took the time to really think about this, would have physical boundaries, emotional boundaries, intellectual boundaries, financial boundaries, right? There's these different areas, spirituality boundaries, logistical boundaries. And you ask yourself the question of what feels good to me in this area? Does this feel okay to me? Does this not feel okay to me? In my book, I actually have several different questions for each of these boundary areas in case you have difficulty coming up with answers. But before you define them for yourself, you don't know how to hold them because you didn't even realize that a boundary has been trespassed until you start to feel really bad. And you're like, I wonder why. So the first most important thing is to actually write down what they actually are, because once you have a clearer knowledge of where your boundaries really lie, then it's going to be a little easier to enforce them.
My experience engendered this little poem that came through me called The Healing Power of No. May I share that with you?
Yes, please.
A time comes for choosing, rather than losing, the essence that makes us so. And in the bestowing, there's power in knowing the freedom that comes with no. When said with compassion, not angry in fashion, and letting the self-love flow, there's a sense of renewing and deep soul imbuing the awareness that comes with no. So with gentle voice and the power of choice and the courage to make it so, I'm still here, my friends. There's no means in this end, just the healing that comes with no.
Wow, that is so on point and also beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with me, Victor. I think that could help so many people because you're really speaking to that self-critic that happens when sometimes you try to say no to people, or maybe there's a part of you that's afraid to say no, and you don't realize that there's a loving way to say no, and it's actually benefiting both yourself and the person that you love.
Thank you. Yes. In your book, you also encourage individuals to explore their spiritual or religious beliefs, make time for spiritual activities that are meaningful to them, and communicate their ideas about the meaning of life and belief in something greater than themselves. How does this contribute to healing negative attachment styles?
Well, this contributes a lot. And of course, everybody's belief systems are different. And if somebody is listening to this and saying, well, I don't know if I'm a spiritual person, I think all of us are spiritual people because human beings are spiritual beings. And even if you say, well, religion doesn't really quite fit me, or I'm not really sure if I believe in God or, this higher power, the idea is that you are just a small part of this existence. There's so much vastness around us, and so much more beyond just yourself, that even if you didn't believe in a higher power, there is spirituality to be discovered even just by being in nature, taking in that you're just one person in this huge earth, that the universe is so large and there's other living beings that we don't even know about, probably in other planets and other spheres of this universe. Just really even being able to appreciate that is a form of spirituality. But for those who do believe in a higher power, who say, I believe in God, I think that there's a lot of healing when you invest in your spirituality, in your spiritual beliefs, and in establishing a secure attachment to that higher power or to God. Human beings are fallible. Other human beings are going to make mistakes. You also make mistakes, but your higher being, your God, he doesn't make mistakes. It's a completely different experience when you can feel unconditionally loved and supported by a higher being, by God, and knowing that there's something there that can help you to establish a stronger connection to yourself, and also to help you to believe in yourself. And in many ways, it's like also investing in your faith in yourself. If this higher power, if God loves you unconditionally, then who are you to not love yourself unconditionally? So I think that in discovering your spirituality and spending time in activities like prayer and meditation and reading uplifting literature, it can help you to heal yourself by establishing a secure attachment to someone, something that has no bounds for how much they can love you.
In a world of such divisiveness, including faith-based challenges, how may these techniques promote healing, unity, and compassion?
I think that it's so important for us to remember our common humanity. And sometimes that can be hard to remember. Sometimes we want to win an argument or prove that our point of view is the best view or the right view. But at the very, very core of our existence, all human beings need connection, and all human beings want to be loved. If you can keep those two drives at top of mind, especially when you're about to enter into a divisive conversation, or when you have that inner feeling that rises up that wants to correct somebody for something that they said, if you can just remember that and just keep that top of mind, I think it can help go a long way, even if you don't agree with people, to at least have more respectful conversations where you're taking into account each other's internal drives and dialogues.
Listeners are aware of my background as an interfaith minister, and one of the great lessons I learned at the new seminary was that there's an iteration of the golden rule in virtually every faith and religion. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Love thy neighbor as thyself. What a wonderful world this would be if everyone subscribed to this basic tenet.
I completely agree with you. Put yourself into other people's shoes more often. And I know that there's a lot of times where we say, well, just be the bigger person. But to me, I'm just like, well, just be a person, just be a human being. Imagine what it's like to be another human being in the same situation and how they might be feeling if you treated them in one way versus the other. And, there is really a big sentiment about people paying it forward. We know this from research that if you do something nice, just a random kind gesture, that person is more likely to pass that on, so we can model positive behaviors for one another, even when we're in the middle of our own challenges.
Kindness and compassion, the keys to a wonderful world.
Exactly.
What would you like readers to take away from The New Rules of Attachment?
Well, I think it's important for readers to know that secure attachment is attainable at any time. And you just need to start fostering a more secure attachment to yourself. Believe in yourself more. Believe in your ability and your agency as an adult to create different patterns that are healthier, not only for you, but for all the people you come into contact with and the next generation.
My guest is Dr. Judy Ho. Her new book, The New Rules of Attachment, How to Heal Your Relationships, Reparent Your Inner Child, and Secure Your Life Vision. Dr. Judy, one more time, please share with our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you.
Thank you so much, Victor. It's been great to speak with you. You can find out more about me at my website, drjudyho.com. There's also information for how to purchase my books. They're sold everywhere. Books are sold, including Amazon. And you can follow me on social media at Dr. Judy Ho.
Dr. Judy, thank you so much for joining us and sharing this wonderful wisdom and this important message with our listeners.
Thank you so much, Victor. And I really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.